The sun was setting as Sir Cedric rode into Ironhold, the capital of Drakmore. The city was vast and imposing, with tall, dark stone buildings and narrow, winding streets that hinted at its history as a place of war and trade. The air smelled of iron and smoke, evidence of the many forges and smithies that gave the city its name. He, tired from his long journey, made his way through the bustling streets to the nearest tavern, the Anvil, a warm, welcoming place known for its strong ale and hearty food. Cedric pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, the sound of laughter and conversation washing over him. The tavern was filled with people, mostly travelers, merchants, and locals looking to escape the chill of the evening. He found a vacant seat at the bar, ordered a drink, and settled down to rest his feet. Nearby, a group of men sat huddled around a table, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the fire. One of them, a well-dressed man with a quill behind his ear and a small book in his hand, was speaking in an animated tone, clearly telling a story. Cedric listened with half an ear until he caught a phrase that made him sit up straight.
And there it was, a golden dragon glittering in the sun as big as a house. It swooped down from the sky right over the heads of the tax collectors and...
Cedric interrupted, unable to contain his curiosity.
"Excuse me,"
he said, turning to the table.
"Did you say a golden dragon? Where exactly did you see that?"
The group at the table fell silent, the storyteller narrowing his eyes at Cedric before answering with a raised eyebrow.
"And who are you, stranger? It is impolite to interrupt a story before it is finished."
The knight smiled slightly and inclined his head.
"Forgive my rudeness. My name is Cedric, a simple knight-errant. I have traveled far and wide, and tales of dragons always interest me. That is why I could not help but ask."
The man studied him for a moment, then nodded.
"A knight, eh? Well, I am Alteron Vale, a writer by trade. I write poetry and prose, though lately my interests have tended toward tales of the fantastic, dragons in particular. I am working on a story right now, as it happens."
He patted the small book in front of him. Cedric leaned forward slightly, his voice even.
"And this dragon you saw, where did it happen? I have heard of many dragons, but never a golden one."
Alteron took a sip of his drink, clearly enjoying the attention.
"It happened in the kingdom of Alaria, quite a distance from here. I was traveling near a small village called Windrest on the eastern road when I saw it. A group of tax collectors had just left the village, their carts laden with coins. Suddenly, out of nowhere, this magnificent golden dragon swooped down from the clouds. I had never seen anything like it. It hadn't attacked the village or harmed anyone, mind you, just the tax collectors. It scattered them like flies, snatched a chest of gold from their cart, and flew off into the hills."
Cedric's eyes narrowed slightly as he listened, his mind already racing with possibilities.
"Are you sure it was a golden dragon?"
"Without a doubt."
Alteron replied, his voice full of conviction.
"Its scales were like burnished gold, shining so brightly in the sun it was almost blinding. I couldn't believe my eyes. The villagers were as stunned as I was, though I would say they were more pleased than anything else. Less taxes to pay, after all."
Cedric nodded slowly, considering the information.
"And this happened near Windrest, you say? Not long ago?"
Alteron leaned back in his chair, tapping his chin thoughtfully.
"A few weeks ago, I would say, but it's still fresh in my mind. I've been thinking about how to fit it into my story. Dragons, tax collectors, a bit of justice from the sky. There's a certain poetic charm to it, isn't there?"
Cedric smiled faintly.
"Indeed, a fascinating tale, Alteron. Thank you for sharing it."
Alteron inclined his head.
It's my pleasure, Sir Knight. If you ever come across a story of your own, I'd be glad to hear it. Perhaps I could write it into one of my books.
Cedric nodded politely, then excused himself and headed upstairs to his room. Once inside, he sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the locket from beneath his tunic, clutching it to his chest.
Vorganax,
He whispered.
did you hear that?
The dragon's deep rumbling voice filled his mind.
I heard a gold dragon near Windrest. It's unusual for a dragon to attack a simple tax convoy. There may be more to this story than this writer knows.
I thought so too.
Cedric replied.
We should investigate. What do you think?
The dragon answered right away.
Also agreed. At daybreak we go for Windrest. Given a gold dragon is involved, that would be rather unusual. And we should be ready should that dragon be behaving out of despair or something more sinister.
Cedric nodded and tucked the pendant back into his shirt.
What is unusual?
Golden dragons are quite wise and ancient creatures. They do not engage in thievery.
Vorganax said. Tucking the pendant back inside his shirt, Cedric nodded. Then we head off in the morning. He leaned back on the bed as the moon rose high over Ironhold, the thrill of the writer's narrative still vivid in his thoughts. But tiredness prevailed, and he fast fell asleep. At dawn they set out for Windrest. The sky was still a pale gray, and the crisp morning air clung to the dew-soaked grass as they made their way across the rugged landscape. Days passed in silence, broken only by the sound of hoofbeats and the wind rustling through the trees. The dragon flew high above, his massive wings cutting through the clouds as he scouted the path ahead. After long days of travel, they finally reached Windrest. From a distance, the village appeared peaceful, nestled among rolling hills, with the faint smoke of chimneys rising into the sky. But as Cedric approached, something felt off.
There are a lot of patrols.
Cedric muttered to himself, eyeing the soldiers stationed at the village's edge, their armor glinting in the midday sun. Vorganax, who had landed nearby, hidden by a thick cluster of trees, spoke in a low voice.
I'll scout the area from above. See if anything unusual is happening beyond the village. Go ahead, make inquiries, and stay cautious. These patrols aren't a good sign.
The knight nodded, tightening his grip on his reins before spurring his horse forward into Windrest. As he rode through the village, he noticed groups of soldiers patrolling, speaking with the townsfolk, who glanced nervously at them but said little. The presence of so many soldiers didn't seem to align with the sleepy, rustic charm of the village. Eventually, he reached the local tavern, a rickety but lively place called the Broken Quill. The sound of laughter and conversation spilled out into the street as he dismounted and made his way inside. The tavern was packed, filled with farmers, laborers, and a few merchants. Cedric approached the bar where the owner, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and a stern expression, stood cleaning a mug.
Good day.
He greeted him.
I'll take some food and drink, and if you have any free rooms, I'd like to rent one.
The innkeeper gave him a once-over, then nodded.
We've got rooms upstairs, 10 silver for the night, and the food will be another 5.
Cedric handed over the coin without hesitation, then sat at the bar as the innkeeper placed a plate of bread and roasted meat in front of him, along with a tankard of ale. After taking a bite of his food, he leaned in slightly and asked,
Seems lively here tonight. Do you have some kind of celebration going on?
The innkeeper chuckled and shook his head.
No celebration, friend, just the usual folk, coming in to relax After a hard week of work, we do get more visitors these days. Though, what with the extra patrols?
The knight raised an eyebrow.
Patrols? Soldiers from the city, I take it?
The innkeeper's expression soured slightly.
Yes, they've been sniffing around ever since the tax collectors were robbed on the road nearby. They say they're looking for the culprits, but honestly, they're just looking to blame someone. Don't care much about who.
Cedric feigned surprise, though he had already heard the story from Altheron.
Robbed, you say? And by whom?
The innkeeper leaned in closer, lowering his voice.
Word is, it was a dragon.
The knight blinked, playing up his surprise.
A dragon? Surely not.
Yes, a dragon.
The innkeeper said, mockingly emphasizing the word as if he found the whole notion absurd.
That's the story going around. Anyway, big golden beast swooped down, scared the tax collectors half to death, and made off with their gold. Soldiers have been crawling all over the place since, thinking they'll catch it or whoever they believe is responsible.
Interesting.
Cedric said, taking a slow sip from his drink.
Is there anyone who might know more about this incident?
The innkeeper shook his head.
Not that I know of. Most folk are just scared to talk about it. But if you're looking to find out more, you could try asking around. Maybe someone will loosen up after a few drinks.
As they spoke, Cedric noticed a figure in a dark cloak sitting at a table near the back of the tavern. The figure had been listening intently to their conversation, and as soon as he mentioned the dragon, she rose from their seat and headed for the door, glancing briefly at him from beneath the hood. Though the face was obscured, the intent gaze was unmistakable. He watched the figure leave, then returned his attention to the innkeeper.
Well, thank you for the information. I think I'll head to my room and get some rest.
The innkeeper nodded.
Room's up the stairs, third on the left.
Cedric finished his meal, paid the innkeeper, and made his way upstairs. Once inside his small, sparsely furnished room, he closed the door and pulled the medallion from beneath his tunic. Whispering,
Vorganax,
he said,
I'll try to find out more from the locals tomorrow.
Okay, I'll expand the search around the village tomorrow. Now get some rest.
The dragon's voice rumbled in his mind. The knight nodded to himself and slipped the pendant back beneath his shirt. Laying down on the bed, he hoped tomorrow would bring more responses. But right now, he needed sleep. When Cedric awoke the next morning, the first thing he noticed was an odd smell in the air, earthy and pungent. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he groggily reached for his tunic, only to find that it was frayed and riddled with tiny holes. Puzzled, he grabbed his trousers, and they too were in disarray, small gnaw marks chewed along the edges. He quickly inspected the rest of his belongings, only to find his coin pouch completely torn open, its contents gone.
Mice,
He muttered, disbelief coloring his voice. He picked up his empty coin pouch, a large, ragged hole staring back at him.
You've got to be kidding me.
Frustrated, he retrieved the medallion from under his shirt and whispered,
Vorganax, are you there?
The dragon's deep, rumbling voice echoed in his mind.
I'm here, what is it?
Cedric let out a bitter chuckle.
I think some mice have stolen all my coins.
There was a pause, and then the dragon spoke again, a note of surprise in his tone.
Mice, you mean to tell me mice have chewed through your clothes and taken your money?
The knight looked at his ruined garments, his lips twisting in frustration.
Yes, all of it. It's almost like they knew what they were doing.
Strange.
Vorganax said thoughtfully.
Mice don't usually behave like that. Something odd is going on in this village. Keep your guard up. You might be dealing with more than just pests.
Cedric dressed himself in his now hole-ridden clothes, shaking his head at the absurdity of it all. He secured his sword to his side and left the tavern, determined to find answers. As he walked through the streets of Windrest, he tried to approach some of the villagers, hoping to glean any information about the mysterious dragon or the odd events plaguing the village. However, most villagers avoided his gaze, hurried about their business, or offered only curt responses before turning away. The morning air was thick with tension, and he could feel the weight of watchful eyes upon him. Every now and then a soldier would pass by, casting him a wary glance but saying nothing. The air felt heavy, like the village was hiding something much larger than a mere dragon sighting. Frustrated by his lack of progress, he found himself wandering into a narrow alley between two stone buildings. As he walked, a soft rustle came from behind him. He turned instinctively, but before he could fully spin around, a low voice stopped him.
"Don't turn around,"
the voice warned in a whisper.
"if you want to learn anything about the dragon. You'll go to the cliff."
Cedric froze, his hand instinctively drifting toward the hilt of his sword. The figure behind him gestured forward, pointing directly in front of his face at a distant cliff surrounded by thick spruce trees, barely visible through the morning mist.
The cliff?
He asked, his voice calm but firm.
What's there?
"Answers.
The voice replied cryptically.
But you must go alone."
Cedric tried to ask more, turning his head slightly to get a look at the stranger.
Who are?
When he turned fully, the alley was empty. The figure had disappeared as silently as they had arrived. Cedric narrowed his eyes and scanned the surroundings, but there was no trace of the mysterious person.
Vorganax,
he murmured under his breath, tapping the medallion.
I heard.
The dragon responded in his mind.
Head toward the cliff. I'll meet you there.
Without hesitation, Cedric mounted his horse, tightening his reins as he spurred it forward. The villagers and soldiers barely took notice of him as he galloped out of the village, the spruce-covered cliff looming ever closer in the distance. As he approached the base of the cliff, he dismounted cautiously, scanning the dense forest for anything unusual. The trees around him seemed still, the air heavy with tension. Something felt off, but he couldn't quite place it. Moving quietly through the underbrush, he strained his eyes to catch a glimpse of anything that might reveal the dragon's whereabouts. Suddenly, a rustle came from the bushes. Without warning, a massive golden dragon lunged at him, its scales shimmering in the dappled sunlight as it burst from the foliage. His instincts kicked in immediately. He grabbed his shield and raised it just in time to block a devastating blow from the dragon's tail, but the force of the impact sent him flying back against the rocky cliff. His back hit the stone with a sickening thud, and pain shot through his body as he struggled to get back on his feet. Through gritted teeth, Cedric touched his medallion and gasped.
Vorganax, it's here. Hurry.
Before he could prepare for the next attack, the golden dragon snatched him up in its powerful clawed paw, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. The creature growled at him menacingly, its molten eyes gleaming with fury as it tried to intimidate him. But before it could do more, a shadow passed overhead. Vorganax descended from the sky with a ferocious roar, his enormous wings casting a shadow over the forest. He landed on the golden dragon with a crash, sinking his claws deep into its back. The golden dragon screeched in pain, instinctively releasing Cedric, who dropped heavily onto the ground below. As Cedric groaned and rolled over, clutching his side in pain, the two dragons became locked in a vicious battle. The earth trembled beneath them, and trees cracked and splintered as their massive bodies slammed against the rocky terrain. Vorganax, being the larger and more experienced of the two, gained the upper hand. His jaws clamped down on the golden dragon's neck, pinning it against the cliffside, his powerful limbs holding her in place as she struggled weakly. Suddenly, the golden dragon's growls turned into a soft, trembling voice.
Please, have mercy.
Startled, Vorganax loosened his grip. Cedric, limping toward the dragon, stared in disbelief as the golden dragon's body shimmered and began to shrink. Before his eyes, the creature transformed, shrinking into the form of a young woman with golden hair and eyes that gleamed like molten gold. Cedric, leaning heavily on his sword, approached.
Who are you?
He asked, his voice still laced with disbelief. The girl, still breathing heavily, looked at him, rubbing her neck where Vorganax's jaws had been moments before.
My name is Aloan.
She said, her voice soft but wary.
Who are you?
Cedric paused, then introduced himself.
I'm Sir Cedric, a knight of Lizoria. And this, my friend.
He gestured toward the red dragon looming behind her.
Is Vorganax a real dragon?
Aloan's eyes widened in surprise.
A real dragon?
She asked, turning toward Vorganax.
Are you truly one of the ancient ones?
The dragon rumbled, stepping closer but keeping his distance.
I am.
He said, his voice deep and resonant.
And what of you? You can change into a dragon, but you're not one of us. How do you possess such power?
The girl hesitated for a moment, then reached into her tunic and pulled out a modest silver medallion glinting in the dim light. It was simple, unadorned save for a faint, intricate design engraved into its surface.
It's thanks to this,
she explained.
This medallion allows me to shift not just into a dragon, but into different animals as well.
Vorganax's sharp eyes studied the medallion closely.
A gimat.
He muttered thoughtfully.
This is a very old relic. Where did you get it?
Aloan's fingers brushed the smooth surface of the medallion as she replied.
I helped a traveling merchant who passed through our village some years ago. He was in trouble, and in return for my help, he gave me this amulet. I never knew what it was until it began to change me.
Cedric, wincing slightly from the ache in his side, grumbled.
Well, you're certainly not the friendliest to travelers, are you? Was it you who sent those mice to gnaw through my things?
A small smile tugged at the corners of Aloan's lips.
No. I was a little mouse,
she admitted, looking a little embarrassed.
I didn't know who you were, and I thought you worked for the guards or the tax collectors. So I kept an eye on you.
Cedric shook his head, but he couldn't help but laugh at her cleverness.
Well, maybe next time you should ask first.
The girl laughed softly, then looked guilty.
Sorry. I'll pay you. I didn't mean any harm. I just thought you were a spy or something. And when I saw you didn't look like a guard, I thought I could scare you into answering my questions.
And you succeeded. You caught me by surprise.
The knight grinned. Vorganax also smiled. However, when he turned to address the patrols that were located in the distance, he spoke with caution.
No time for this. Soldiers are everywhere. We need somewhere to hide.
Aloan nodded.
You're right. Come with me. My hideout is not far from here. It's safe and away from patrols. You can tell me what you're really doing here.
Cedric exchanged a glance with Vorganax, who nodded in agreement. Together they followed Elowen deeper into the forest, the looming threat of discovery pressing in on them as they searched for answers.